The tournament grounds were alive with energy, a sea of spectators lining the pristine greens of the championship golf course. Tyler Reed, the golden boy of the professional golfing world, strode confidently across the practice area. His polished smile gleamed as brightly as the clubs in his bag, and the crowd's murmurs of admiration followed his every step. Tyler was at the top of his game, young, wealthy, and oozing confidence. To many he was a star. But beneath the surface of his charm lay an arrogance that often alienated those around him. Tyler glanced over his shoulder as his team approached, and his grin faltered slightly when he saw the man assigned as his caddy for the day. Joe was nothing like the lean, athletic caddies Tyler usually preferred. He was older, in his mid-40s, with a heavy frame and a slight limp. His face was kind but weathered, his eyes carrying a quiet determination that seemed out of place in Tyler's world of showmanship and flair. "Is this a joke?" Tyler muttered under his breath, turning to his coach. "You expect me to win a championship with that?" The coach gave Tyler a sharp look. "Joe's one of the best caddies in the business. Knows this course like the back of his hand. You'd be smart to listen to him." Tyler snorted, his skepticism evident. "Sure, if I need advice on where to find a snack bar." Joe approached, extending a hand in greeting. "Tyler, good to meet you," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Let's make this a good one." Tyler ignored the outstretched hand, his gaze sweeping Joe from head to toe. "We'll see," he said curtly, shouldering his bag and striding toward the first hole. Joe followed without a word, his expression unreadable. As the game began, it became clear that Tyler wasn't interested in hearing Joe's advice. At the first hole, Joe suggested a conservative approach, a shot that would avoid a sand trap and position Tyler for a clean second stroke. But Tyler, eager to impress the crowd, opted for a riskier play. He swung hard, sending the ball sailing through the air. For a moment, it seemed perfect, until it landed squarely in the bunker. Tyler muttered a curse under his breath as he approached the sand trap. Joe stood a few paces behind, his face calm but watchful. "You rushed it," Joe said simply. "Next time, take a breath before you swing." Tyler shot him a glare. "I don't need advice from someone who can't even carry the bag without breaking a sweat." Joe didn't respond, his expression remaining steady. He simply handed Tyler the sand wedge and stepped back, letting him handle the shot on his own. Tyler's frustration simmered as he hacked at the ball, finally managing to escape the bunker but losing valuable strokes in the process. As the game continued, Tyler's arrogance became more apparent. He dismissed Joe's suggestions at every turn, scoffing at the older man's calm demeanor. When Joe suggested a 3-iron for a tricky approach shot, Tyler grabbed his driver instead, determined to prove he knew better. The ball veered off course, landing in the rough, and Tyler's temper flared. "This is ridiculous," Tyler muttered as he stomped toward the ball. "Why did they even assign me a caddy? I'm better off on my own." Joe remained silent, his hands resting lightly on the bag. He didn't need to defend himself. He'd seen players like Tyler before, young and brash, too blinded by their own talent to recognize the value of experience. But Joe also knew that the course had a way of humbling even the most arrogant players, and he was content to wait. By the 5th hole, Tyler's frustration was evident. His shots were inconsistent, his focus scattered, and the other players were beginning to pull ahead. The crowd's murmurs grew quieter as Tyler's once impressive reputation faltered under the weight of his mistakes. Joe, however, remained steady, offering quiet advice when needed and stepping back when Tyler refused to listen. During a break between holes, Joe finally spoke. "You're trying too hard," he said, his voice low enough that only Tyler could hear. "Golf isn't about power. It's about precision. Control." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Spare me the lecture. I know how to play." Joe met his gaze, his expression calm but firm. "Do you? Because right now, it seems like you're playing to prove something, not to win." The words hit a nerve, but Tyler refused to let it show. Instead, he turned away, focusing on the next shot. But as he approached the tee, he couldn't shake Joe's comment. Was he trying to prove something? And if so, to whom? The turning point came at the 7th hole, a challenging par 5 with a narrow fairway and a water hazard guarding the green. Tyler's confidence had taken a hit after a series of poor shots, and the pressure was mounting. Joe studied the layout of the hole, his eyes narrowing as he considered the options. "You need to lay up," Joe said finally. "Use a 5-iron to keep it short of the water. Then you can go for the green on your second shot." Tyler hesitated, glancing at the crowd. He could feel their eyes on him, their anticipation palpable. A safe play wouldn't impress them, it wouldn't redeem him in their eyes. "No," Tyler said, shaking his head. "I'm going for it." Joe's brow furrowed. "It's a risky shot," he warned. "If you miss, you'll be in the water and you'll lose the hole." Tyler tightened his grip on his driver. "I can make it," he said, more to himself than to Joe. "Just watch." The crowd fell silent as Tyler stepped up to the ball, his posture rigid with determination. He swung hard, sending the ball soaring through the air. For a moment, it seemed perfect, a powerful, arching shot that drew cheers from the spectators. But as the ball descended, it became clear that it was veering off course. It splashed into the water with a loud plop, and the cheers turned to gasps. Tyler's face turned red as he stared at the water hazard, his chest heaving with frustration. Joe approached him quietly, handing him another ball. "You've got this," Joe said simply. "Just focus on the next shot." Tyler didn't respond. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own hubris pressing down on him. He had ignored Joe's advice, dismissed his expertise, and now he was paying the price. As the day wore on, Tyler's attitude began to shift. He started listening to Joe, following his suggestions and trusting his judgment. With Joe's guidance, Tyler managed to claw his way back into the game, delivering a series of precise, calculated shots that impressed even his toughest critics. By the time they reached the final hole, Tyler was tied for the lead. The crowd was on edge, their excitement palpable as they watched him prepare for his final shot. Joe handed him a club, his expression calm and steady. "Just breathe," Joe said. "You've got this." Tyler nodded, his heart pounding as he stepped up to the ball. He took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythm of his swing, and struck the ball cleanly. It sailed through the air, landing just a few feet from the hole. The crowd erupted in cheers as Tyler sank the putt, securing his victory. But as the applause washed over him, Tyler's mind wasn't on the trophy or the accolades. It was on Joe, the man he had underestimated and mocked, who had stayed by his side and guided him to success. As the crowd surged forward to congratulate Tyler, he found himself looking past the smiling faces and outstretched hands, his gaze searching for one person. Joe stood a few paces back, his hands resting lightly on the bag, his expression calm and unreadable. For a moment, Tyler hesitated, unsure of what to say. The words forming in his mind felt clumsy and inadequate. But Joe, as always, didn't need much. He nodded slightly, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement, and began to turn away, giving Tyler the space to bask in his victory. Tyler felt a pang in his chest. He didn't want Joe to leave, not like this. "Joe!" Tyler called out, his voice carrying over the din of the crowd. Heads turned as Tyler pushed through the throng, his trophy still clutched in one hand. He reached Joe, his chest heaving, his mind racing. "Wait," Tyler said, his voice softer now. "I need to say something." Joe raised an eyebrow but remained silent, his gaze steady. "I was wrong," Tyler blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "About everything. About you. I was an idiot to treat you the way I did." Joe's lips quirked into a faint smile, but he didn't interrupt. Tyler took a deep breath, forcing himself to continue. "You were right about the game, about the course, about how I needed to play," Tyler said. "But more than that, you were right about me. I've been playing to prove something, not because I love it. And I took that out on you." Joe studied him for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm. "The game has a way of humbling all of us, Tyler. It's not about being perfect, it's about learning. And you learned today. That's what matters." Tyler shook his head, frustration bubbling beneath his gratitude. "It's not enough," he said. "I owe you more than that. You saved me out there, Joe. I wouldn't have won without you." Joe's smile widened, and for the first time, Tyler saw a hint of pride in the older man's eyes. "You're a good player, Tyler," Joe said. "But you can be more than that. And I think you're starting to realize it." Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the sun had dipped below the horizon, Tyler found himself sitting alone at the edge of the course. The trophy sat beside him, forgotten, as he stared out at the rolling greens. The day's events played over in his mind, each moment bringing a fresh wave of regret and gratitude. The sound of footsteps broke his reverie, and he turned to see Joe approaching, his silhouette outlined by the soft glow of the clubhouse lights. He carried 2 bottles of water, handing one to Tyler as he sat down beside him. "You're still here," Tyler said, surprised. Joe chuckled softly. "I figured you might need some company. Big wins can feel pretty empty if you're sitting with them alone." Tyler nodded, his grip tightening around the water bottle. "You're right about that," he admitted. "I used to think winning was everything. That if I just kept piling up trophies, I'd feel whole. But now I'm not so sure." Joe leaned back, his gaze sweeping over the course. "Winning's not about the trophies," he said. "It's about the journey. The people you meet, the lessons you learn. That's what makes it worth it." Tyler hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at him all day. "Why do you do it, Joe? Why stick with guys like me when you've got so much more to offer? You could have been a pro yourself, you said so." Joe's expression turned wistful, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the clubhouse. "I had my shot," he said. "Years ago, before the injury. And yeah, I was good. But life had other plans. I could have let that break me, but instead I decided to focus on what I could still do. Helping players like you. It's my way of staying in the game, of giving back to the sport I love." Tyler's throat tightened. "And I treated you like crap," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "You didn't deserve that." Joe shook his head. "You weren't the first player to underestimate me, and you won't be the last. But I'm not here for the thanks, Tyler. I'm here because I believe in the game, and in the people who play it. Even the ones who need a little extra guidance." Tyler smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth cutting through his guilt. "You're a better man than I am, Joe." Joe chuckled, clapping Tyler on the shoulder. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean you can't catch up." The days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, media appearances, and celebrations. Tyler played the part of the victorious champion, but his mind kept drifting back to Joe. He couldn't shake the image of the older man, steady and unwavering, guiding him through the toughest match of his career. And he couldn't shake the feeling that he owed Joe more than just gratitude. A week later, Tyler showed up unannounced at the modest home Joe shared with his family. He felt out of place as he stood on the porch, the manicured lawns of his own neighborhood a stark contrast to the well-worn charm of Joe's small house. He hesitated, wondering if he was intruding, but before he could change his mind, the door opened. Joe stood there, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Tyler," he said. "What brings you here?" Tyler held up a small envelope, his nerves betraying him. "I wanted to give you something," he said. "And I wanted to say thank you. Properly, this time." Joe took the envelope, his brow furrowing as he opened it. Inside was a letter of apology, written in Tyler's uneven handwriting, and a check, a significant one, enough to make a real difference in Joe's life. "I don't want this," Joe said immediately, holding the check out to Tyler. "Please," Tyler said, his voice earnest. "It's not just about the money. It's about what it represents. You believed in me, Joe, when I didn't deserve it. Let me do something to show that I believe in you, too." Joe hesitated, then nodded slowly, tucking the envelope into his pocket. "Thank you, Tyler," he said, his voice quiet. "It means a lot." Months passed, and Tyler's career continued to flourish, but his focus had shifted. He began mentoring younger players, sharing not just the technical aspects of the game but the lessons Joe had taught him about humility, resilience, and the power of connection. And every time he stepped onto the course, he carried Joe's calm wisdom with him. Joe, meanwhile, continued to caddy, his reputation growing as one of the most respected figures in the sport. But he never sought the spotlight. His satisfaction came from the quiet victories, the players he helped shape, and the lives he touched along the way. One day, as Tyler prepared for another tournament, he spotted Joe on the practice green with a young, nervous player. Joe's voice was calm, his gestures patient, and Tyler couldn't help but smile. He walked over, shaking Joe's hand warmly. "You still making miracles happen?" Tyler asked, grinning. Joe chuckled. Just doing what I can. Tyler looked at the young player, then back at Joe. You changed my life, you know? Joe's smile widened and he patted Tyler on the shoulder. You changed it yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction. As Tyler stepped onto the green, ready to face another day of competition, he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known before. The game was still important, but it wasn't everything. What mattered most was the journey and the people who walked it with him. Tyler couldn't stop reflecting on how much had changed in his life since the day he met Joe. He had come into that tournament with arrogance and a dismissive attitude, thinking he had all the answers. Now, he realized how little he actually knew, not just about golf but about life itself. Joe had opened his eyes to what it meant to truly grow, to let go of ego, and to embrace humility. Weeks later, Tyler was invited to speak at a charity event for young golfers, an initiative Joe had been quietly supporting for years. The event was held at a modest but well-kept golf course, where dozens of young players, many from underprivileged backgrounds, had gathered to learn the fundamentals of the game. Tyler arrived early, hoping to find Joe before the event began. He spotted Joe near the driving range, surrounded by a group of kids who were hanging on his every word. Joe demonstrated a simple putting technique, his voice patient and steady as he encouraged the children to focus on precision rather than power. One of the kids, a boy no older than 12, missed the shot and looked visibly frustrated. Don't worry, Joe said, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. It's not about getting it right the first time. It's about learning what went wrong and trying again. Every great player started just like you. The boy's face brightened, and he nodded, gripping the putter with renewed determination. Tyler watched the scene unfold, his chest tightening with emotion. Joe wasn't just teaching them golf. He was teaching them resilience, the kind of lesson that would stay with them long after they left the course. When Joe finally noticed Tyler, he waved him over with a smile. Didn't think you'd show up so early, Joe said, handing Tyler a club. You here to help, or just to make a speech? Tyler laughed. I'm here to do both, he said. Figured I could lend a hand first. Joe nodded approvingly and handed Tyler a bucket of balls. Good. Start with the kids at the chipping green. They've got a lot of heart, but they need someone to show them how to keep it steady. Tyler spent the next hour working with the young players, offering tips and encouragement. It felt different from the high-stakes world of professional golf. A slower pace, but one that felt deeply rewarding. As he watched the kids improve with each swing, he couldn't help but think about how much he owed Joe. This was the kind of work that truly mattered, and it had taken Joe to show him that. After the event, Tyler was invited to give his speech. Standing at the podium, he looked out at the crowd of young golfers, their families, and the volunteers who had made the event possible. His gaze found Joe near the back of the group, leaning casually against a golf cart, his arms crossed as he listened. Tyler took a deep breath, gripping the sides of the podium. A few months ago, he began, I thought I knew everything. I thought winning was about skill, talent, and maybe a little bit of luck. But I was wrong. Winning, real winning, is about the people who guide you, who push you to be better, even when you don't think you need it. The crowd was silent, their attention fixed on him. Tyler continued, his voice steady. I met someone who taught me that golf isn't just about the game. It's about respect, humility, and learning to listen. He didn't have to teach me those lessons. He didn't owe me anything, but he did it anyway. Tyler's voice broke slightly as he gestured toward Joe. That man is Joe Harper. He's not just a great caddy, he's a great person. And I wouldn't be standing here today without him. The crowd erupted into applause, many turning to look at Joe, who gave a modest nod but otherwise stayed where he was. Tyler smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known before. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about something bigger. As the event wound down, Tyler found Joe by the clubhouse, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the sunset over the course. Tyler joined him, leaning against the railing. You didn't have to say all that, Joe said, his tone light but sincere. I did, Tyler replied. It's the truth. Joe smiled, shaking his head. You've come a long way, kid. Tyler chuckled. Thanks to you. They stood in companionable silence for a while, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the course. Tyler felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Joe, but for the lessons he'd learned along the way. He knew he still had a lot to figure out, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. Months later, Tyler took another step in his journey of growth. He reached out to Joe with an idea, a mentorship program for young golfers, one that would provide resources, training, and support for kids who might not otherwise have access to the sport. Joe was hesitant at first, reluctant to step into the spotlight, but Tyler insisted. "This is your legacy, Joe," Tyler said during one of their late-night conversations. "You've spent your life helping players like me. It's time to help the next generation." Joe eventually agreed, and together, they launched the program. It started small, with just a handful of kids and a few donated clubs, but it quickly grew. Word spread about the initiative, and sponsors began to take notice. Within a year, the program had expanded to multiple courses, reaching hundreds of young golfers across the country. For Tyler, the program became more than just a project. It became a way to give back, to honor Joe's influence in his life. And for Joe, it was a chance to see his passion for the game passed on to a new generation. Years later, Tyler stood on the same course where he had first met Joe, now older and wiser but still deeply connected to the sport. The mentorship program had flourished, and Joe's name had become synonymous with generosity and wisdom in the golfing world. As Tyler watched a group of young players practice their swings, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Joe walked up beside him, his gait slower but his presence as steady as ever. "Not bad, huh?" Joe said, gesturing to the kids on the course. "Not bad at all," Tyler replied, smiling. "You did this, Joe. You changed lives." Joe shook his head. "We did this," he said. "Together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the course in a warm, golden glow, Tyler felt a quiet peace settle over him. He had spent so much of his life chasing trophies and accolades, but now he understood what truly mattered: the people who walked the journey with him and the impact they left behind. "Thanks, Joe," Tyler said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. Joe smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Anytime, kid." And with that, they turned back to the course, ready to guide the next generation towards something greater than the game itself. Tyler's transformation wasn't immediate. For weeks after the tournament, he wrestled with the lessons he had learned from Joe. The arrogance that had once defined him didn't simply vanish overnight. It lingered like a shadow, challenging him every time he faced a new situation. One particular incident stuck in his mind. Tyler had agreed to attend a charity golf event, an event where amateurs and professionals played together to raise funds for a children's hospital. He was paired with a young woman named Erica, a novice golfer whose nervous energy reminded him of how he had once dismissed Joe. Erica struggled from the very first hole, her shots veering wildly off course, her frustration mounting with each miss. "Don't worry," Tyler said, forcing a smile. "You'll get the hang of it." But as the game progressed, Erica's frustration turned inward. "I'm holding you back," she muttered after another missed shot. "You'd be better off without me." Those words hit Tyler harder than he expected. They reminded him of the way he had treated Joe, how he had dismissed him as a burden, an obstacle to his success. For a moment, he stood frozen, the memory of his cruelty washing over him. "No," Tyler said firmly, stepping closer to Erica. "You're not holding me back. This is a team game, and we're in it together. Let me help you." Erica looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Tyler guided her through her next swing, adjusting her stance and encouraging her to take her time. Her next shot wasn't perfect, but it was an improvement, and the smile that broke across her face was worth more to Tyler than any trophy he'd ever won. By the end of the event, Tyler felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a genuine sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about the score or the accolades. It was about the connection he had made, the small difference he had helped create. And in that moment, he realized just how much Joe had changed him. One evening, months after that first tournament with Joe, Tyler decided to visit him unannounced. He pulled into Joe's driveway, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The house was modest but inviting, its porch light casting a warm glow across the front yard. Tyler hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car, the sound of gravel crunching beneath his feet. Joe opened the door before Tyler could knock, a look of surprise crossing his face. "Tyler," he said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I figured it was about time I stopped by," Tyler said, holding up a bottle of wine as a peace offering. "Thought we could catch up." Joe stepped aside, gesturing for Tyler to come in. The living room was cozy and filled with signs of a life well lived, family photos on the walls, a well-worn recliner, and a shelf lined with books on everything from golf to philosophy. As they sat down, Tyler found himself opening up in a way he rarely did. He told Joe about the charity event, about how it had reminded him of their first meeting. He admitted his struggles with letting go of his ego, his fear of not being enough without the accolades and trophies. Joe listened patiently, his expression thoughtful. "Growth isn't linear, Tyler," he said. "It's messy. Some days you'll feel like you've got it all figured out, and other days you'll feel like you're back at square one. But as long as you're moving forward, you're doing all right." Tyler nodded, letting Joe's words sink in. "You've got a way of putting things into perspective," he said. "I don't know how you do it." Joe chuckled. "Years of practice," he said. "And a lot of mistakes." As the months turned into years, Tyler and Joe's bond deepened. Tyler began to see Joe not just as a mentor but as a friend, someone who had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He found himself turning to Joe for advice, not just about golf but about life, about how to navigate the challenges of fame, how to stay grounded, how to keep growing. One day, as they sat on a quiet course after a practice round, Tyler asked Joe a question that had been on his mind for a long time. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Tyler asked. "That you'd had the chance to be a pro, to compete on the big stage?" Joe was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes," he admitted, "there are days when I wonder what might have been. But then I think about the life I've had, the people I've met, the lessons I've learned. And I wouldn't trade that for anything." Tyler nodded, his respect for Joe growing with every word. "You're a better man than I am," he said. Joe smiled, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Not better," he said. "Just different." The turning point in their friendship came during a national tournament, where Tyler faced one of the toughest matches of his career. The course was grueling, the competition fierce, and Tyler found himself struggling to keep up. By the time he reached the back nine, he was trailing the leader by 3 strokes, his frustration threatening to overwhelm him. Joe, as always, remained calm. "Breathe," he said quietly. "You've been here before. You know what to do." Tyler nodded, taking a deep breath and focusing on the rhythm of his swing. With Joe's guidance, he delivered a series of near-perfect shots, clawing his way back into contention. On the final hole, with the crowd holding its breath, Tyler sank a long putt to force a playoff. The roar of the spectators was deafening, but all Tyler could think about was Joe, standing a few feet away, his expression calm and steady. In the playoff, Tyler's focus never wavered. He trusted Joe's advice, relied on his own instincts, and delivered one of the best performances of his career. When the final shot dropped, securing his victory, Tyler turned to Joe, his chest heaving with emotion. "This one's for you," Tyler said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't have done it without you." Joe smiled, his pride evident. "You've come a long way, Tyler. But don't stop now." The victory wasn't just a triumph for Tyler, it marked a turning point in how he saw himself and the game. For years, Tyler had believed success was about domination, about proving he was better, faster, stronger than anyone else. But standing there, the trophy in his hand and the crowd cheering, he realized something had changed. The win felt different. It wasn't just his, it belonged to Joe too, and to every person who had supported him along the way. Later that evening, as the celebration died down and the crowd thinned, Tyler found himself walking the course in the fading light. Joe walked beside him, the two of them quiet as they retraced the day's steps. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple, and the air carried a cool stillness. "You know," Tyler began, his voice breaking the silence, "I used to think the only thing that mattered was being the best. Winning at all costs." Joe glanced at him, waiting for him to continue. "But now," Tyler said, running a hand through his hair, "I think I care more about who I am when I'm playing. I care about what the game means, not just to me, but to the people around me. I think I owe that to you." Joe chuckled softly, shaking his head. You didn't owe me anything, Tyler. You just needed someone to remind you what you were capable of. Tyler stopped walking, turning to face Joe. No, he said firmly. I needed more than that. I needed someone to show me who I could be. You did that. And I'll never forget it. Joe smiled, his eyes warm with pride. You've done a lot of growing, Tyler. But remember, this is just the beginning. The next year was one of transformation for Tyler. With Joe's guidance, he became not just a better golfer but a better person. He began mentoring younger players, sharing the lessons he had learned about humility, resilience, and the importance of connection. He volunteered at local golf clinics, working with kids from underserved communities, many of whom had never held a club before. At one such clinic, Tyler met a young boy named Marcus. Marcus was shy, his oversized polo shirt and hand-me-down clubs a stark contrast to the polished equipment of the other kids. But there was a spark in Marcus's eyes, a quiet determination that reminded Tyler of himself at that age. Marcus struggled at first, his swings wild and uncontrolled. The other kids began to lose interest, their attention drifting to more confident players. But Tyler stayed by Marcus's side, guiding him patiently, encouraging him with every swing. You've got this, Tyler said, kneeling beside Marcus as the boy prepared to tee off. Just take your time. Focus on the ball. You're stronger than you think. Marcus nodded, his grip tightening on the club. He swung, and the ball sailed down the fairway, straight and true. It wasn't a perfect shot, but it was his best one yet, and the look of pure joy on Marcus's face was worth more to Tyler than any trophy. That was amazing, Marcus exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. Tyler smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. I knew you had it in you, he said. You just needed to believe it. Meanwhile, Joe's reputation continued to grow. He was no longer just a caddy. He was a mentor, a coach, and a source of inspiration for players of all ages. Tyler watched with pride as Joe became a respected figure in the golfing world, his quiet wisdom touching lives far beyond the course. One day, during a rare moment of downtime, Tyler and Joe sat on the porch of Joe's house, sipping iced tea and watching the world go by. Tyler glanced at Joe, his expression thoughtful. Have you ever thought about writing a book? Tyler asked suddenly. Joe raised an eyebrow. A book? About what? About everything, Tyler said. Your life, your lessons, your philosophy on the game. You've got so much wisdom to share, Joe. People need to hear it. Joe chuckled, shaking his head. I'm not much of a writer, Tyler. Besides, who'd want to read a book by an old caddy? I would, Tyler said earnestly. And I'm pretty sure a lot of other people would too. You've changed lives, Joe. You've changed mine. And I think it's time the world knew your story. Joe fell silent, his gaze distant. Maybe, he said finally. Maybe someday. The mentorship program Tyler and Joe had started continued to flourish, reaching hundreds of kids across the country. Tyler threw himself into the work, organizing fundraisers, recruiting sponsors, and ensuring every child who wanted to play golf had the resources to do so. For Tyler, it was more than just a program. It was a way to honor Joe's legacy, to carry forward the lessons he had learned. One evening, after a particularly successful tournament, Tyler and Joe stood on the course, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The crowd had gone, the clubhouse was quiet, and the world felt still. This, Tyler said, gesturing to the empty course, this is where I feel most at peace. Joe nodded, his expression serene. It's a special place, he said. But it's not the place that matters, it's what you bring to it. Tyler smiled, his heart full. You've brought so much to my life, Joe. I don't think I can ever repay you. Joe shook his head, clapping Tyler on the shoulder. You've already repaid me, Tyler. By becoming the person you were always meant to be. Years passed, and Tyler's career continued to thrive. He won championships, set records, and became one of the most beloved figures in golf. But for Tyler, the greatest victories weren't on the scorecard. They were in the lives he touched, the connections he made, and the lessons he carried forward. Joe eventually retired from caddying, but his influence never waned. He became a mentor to players and coaches alike, his wisdom shaping the future of the sport. And though he no longer walked the course with Tyler, his presence was always felt. On a quiet evening, years after their first meeting, Tyler stood on a familiar course, the golden light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the green. He held a worn club in his hands, one that Joe had given him years ago, a reminder of where it all began. As Tyler lined up his shot, he closed his eyes for a moment, hearing Joe's voice in his mind. "Breathe. You've got this." Tyler smiled, his heart full of gratitude. He swung, the ball sailing into the distance, and as it landed softly on the green, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. The game was still the same, but Tyler had changed, and for that, he would always be thankful. As Tyler watched the ball land softly on the green, a wave of nostalgia swept over him. It was just a simple practice round, no crowds or cameras, yet it felt more profound than any tournament he had ever played. He thought about Joe, about everything the man had taught him, not just about golf, but about life. Tyler realized that his success wasn't truly his alone. It belonged to Joe and every person who had believed in him when he doubted himself. In the years following Joe's retirement, Tyler had stepped into a new role, one that transcended the world of professional golf. He became a mentor and advocate for the mentorship program they had started together. The program now had a presence in over 20 cities, providing not just access to the sport but also scholarships, life skills training, and a sense of belonging to kids who needed it most. One such kid was Marcus, the boy Tyler had met at the golf clinic. Marcus had grown into a confident young man, his natural talent for the game shining through with each passing year. Tyler took Marcus under his wing, coaching him not just in technique but in mindset, instilling the same lessons Joe had passed down to him. During one practice session, Marcus asked Tyler a question that stopped him in his tracks. "Do you ever feel like you're not good enough?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Like, no matter how hard you try, it's never enough?" Tyler paused, the question hitting closer to home than Marcus could have known. He set down his club and turned to face the boy, his expression serious. "All the time," Tyler admitted. "Even now. But I've learned something important. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, giving your best, and learning from your mistakes. That's all anyone can ask for." Marcus nodded, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. "Joe taught you that, didn't he?" he asked. Tyler smiled, the memory of Joe's calm wisdom bringing warmth to his chest. "Yeah," he said. "He did. And now I'm passing it on to you." As the mentorship program grew, Tyler found himself more involved than ever. He attended every event he could, often traveling between cities to meet the kids and their families. The work was demanding but deeply fulfilling, and Tyler felt a sense of purpose he had never known during his early years in the sport. One day, Tyler received an unexpected invitation. A prestigious golf magazine wanted to feature him in a cover story, not for his championships or records, but for his work with the mentorship program. Tyler agreed, but on one condition: Joe had to be part of the story. When the journalist arrived for the interview, Tyler insisted they meet at Joe's house. It was a modest home, unchanged since the first time Tyler had visited, but to him, it felt like hallowed ground. Joe greeted the journalist with his usual humility, brushing off the idea that his story was worth telling. "I'm just a caddy," Joe said with a shrug. "Tyler's the one making a difference?" But Tyler shook his head. "You're more than that, Joe. You've always been more than that." The interview was a mix of laughter, reflection, and raw honesty. Joe shared stories from his years on the course, his struggles after his injury, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Tyler listened intently, marveling at how much wisdom Joe carried in his unassuming way. When the article was published, it became an instant hit. Readers from around the world were captivated by Joe's story, his resilience, his humility, and the quiet impact he had made on so many lives. The magazine received countless letters from people inspired by Joe's journey, and for the first time, Joe began to understand the depth of his influence. One evening, as Tyler and Joe sat on the porch, watching the sunset like they had done so many times before, Joe turned to Tyler with a thoughtful expression. "You know," Joe said, "I used to think my life would be defined by what I didn't accomplish. The tournaments I didn't win, the dreams I didn't chase. But now, looking back, I realize it's not about what I didn't do. It's about what I did." Tyler nodded, his heart heavy with gratitude. You've done more than most people ever will, Joe. You've changed lives, including mine. Joe smiled, his gaze distant. That's what matters in the end, isn't it? Not the trophies or the titles, but the people we help along the way. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of Joe's words settling between them. Tyler felt a lump rise in his throat, but he swallowed it down, determined to honor Joe's legacy in every way he could. In the years that followed, Tyler continued to carry Joe's lessons with him. Even as his career reached new heights, he never lost sight of what truly mattered. He remained deeply involved in the mentorship program, using his platform to inspire others to give back. One day, at a tournament in a small town, Tyler spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Marcus, now a young man, standing beside a group of kids from the mentorship program. Marcus waved, a proud smile on his face, and Tyler felt a surge of pride. The cycle was continuing. Joe's lessons, passed down to Tyler, were now being carried forward by Marcus and others like him. After the tournament, Tyler approached Marcus, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're doing good work," he said. "Joe would be proud." Marcus grinned. "He'd be proud of you too, you know." Tyler's chest tightened, and he nodded. "I hope so," he said softly. The final chapter of Tyler's journey with Joe came on a quiet autumn morning. Joe, now well into his 70s, had decided it was time to step back from the mentorship program, leaving its future in Tyler's hands. They met one last time on the course, the air crisp and the leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold. As they walked the familiar fairways, Joe handed Tyler a small, weathered notebook. "What's this?" Tyler asked, turning it over in his hands. "Just a few things I've learned over the years," Joe said with a smile. "Figured it might come in handy." Tyler opened the notebook, his eyes scanning the neatly written pages. It was filled with advice, reflections, and reminders, Joe's philosophy on golf and life, distilled into simple, powerful words. "Thank you," Tyler said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Joe nodded, his smile warm. "Keep going, Tyler. Keep growing. And remember, every shot's a new chance." Years later, as Tyler stood on a stage, accepting an award for his contributions to the sport and the community, he thought of Joe. The man who had taught him to breathe, to focus, to listen. The man who had changed his life in ways he could never fully repay. "This isn't just my award," Tyler said, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "It belongs to someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. To someone who showed me what it means to be a better player, and a better person. This is for Joe." The audience erupted into applause, but Tyler's thoughts were far away, back on that course where it had all begun. He knew that no matter how far he went, Joe's voice would always be with him, guiding him forward. Years passed, and Tyler carried Joe's teachings with him wherever he went. The mentorship program they had started together became a cornerstone of his legacy, growing into a nationwide initiative that touched thousands of lives. Kids from all walks of life were introduced to the game of golf, but more importantly, they were given hope and opportunities that extended far beyond the course. One sunny afternoon, Tyler found himself back on the course where he had first met Joe. It had become a tradition for him to return every year, not for a tournament, but for a quiet round in Joe's honor. He brought with him the worn notebook Joe had given him years ago, its pages now creased and marked with notes and reflections Tyler had added over time. As Tyler walked the familiar fairways, memories of Joe's calm voice and steady presence flooded his mind. He could almost hear Joe's words as he lined up each shot, feel the weight of his hand on his shoulder in moments of doubt. The course felt different without Joe by his side, but Tyler found solace in knowing that Joe's legacy was alive in every kid who swung a club, every young player who learned not just the game but the values it instilled. After finishing his round, Tyler sat on a bench overlooking the 18th green. He pulled out the notebook, flipping through its pages until he reached a blank one near the back. He smiled to himself, then pulled out a pen and began to write. "Every shot is a new chance." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything Joe had taught him. Tyler closed the notebook, his heart full, and sat in silence, letting the memory of Joe wash over him. That evening, Tyler attended the annual mentorship program gala, now one of the most celebrated events in the golfing world. The room was filled with kids who had gone through the program, many of whom had gone on to achieve remarkable things, not just in golf, but in life. Doctors, teachers, engineers, and even a few professional golfers, all of them had been touched by Joe's influence, even if they'd never met him. Tyler took the stage to give the keynote speech. As he looked out at the crowd, his gaze landed on Marcus, now a mentor himself, seated at a table surrounded by bright-eyed young players. The sight filled Tyler with pride and a sense of peace. "When Joe and I started this program," Tyler began, his voice steady, "we had one simple goal: to give kids a chance." Joe believed that golf was more than a game. He believed it was a way to teach resilience, patience, and humility, lessons that could carry you through life, no matter what challenges you faced. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "Joe isn't here with us tonight," Tyler continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But his spirit is in this room. It's in every one of you who picked up a club for the first time, who believed in yourself because someone else believed in you. And as long as we carry his lessons forward, he'll never truly be gone." The room erupted into applause, and Tyler stepped back from the podium, his chest tight with emotion. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Marcus standing beside him. "Joe would be proud of you," Marcus said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We all are." Tyler smiled, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Joe was proud of all of us," he said. "And that's what matters." After the gala, Tyler walked outside, the cool evening air brushing against his skin. He looked up at the stars, the vast sky reminding him of the countless conversations he'd had with Joe about life, golf, and everything in between. In his heart, he knew Joe's wisdom had shaped him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. As Tyler stood there, a young boy from the program approached him, holding a golf ball and a marker. "Mr. Reed," the boy said hesitantly, "can you sign this for me?" Tyler knelt down, smiling warmly. "Of course," he said, taking the ball and pen. "What's your name?" "Liam," the boy replied, his eyes wide with excitement. Tyler carefully signed the ball, then handed it back to Liam. "You've got a good swing, Liam," he said. "Keep practicing and don't ever give up. Every shot's a new chance." Liam beamed, clutching the ball tightly. "I won't," he said. "Thank you." As Liam ran off to rejoin his friends, Tyler felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. Joe's words were no longer just his. They belonged to everyone who had been touched by the program, by the lessons, and by the legacy they had built together. That night, as Tyler drove home, he thought about the journey he had taken, from the arrogant young player who had dismissed Joe to the man he had become. The road had been long and often difficult, but it had led him to a place of purpose and connection. And as he pulled into his driveway, the stars still shining brightly above, Tyler whispered a quiet thank you to Joe, to the game, and to the life he had been lucky enough to live.